Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The city reported 7,835 coronavirus cases today, with 170 being imported infections. With authorities expecting daily COVID cases to reach 10,000 soon, some measures have been tightened today. That includes mandating people attending banquets to present negative test results. Among the 7,665 local cases registered today, 116 cases were reported from 7 schools around town. All classes at Stanford American School, Hong Kong have been suspended for a week. One class which saw 7 infections had earlier been suspended. 5 elderly care homes logged new COVID cases. 7 more patients died, bringing the city's total death toll in this pandemic wave to 9,437.
Some of you feel that the disease is a mild one. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your health. It's affecting the health of our fellow citizens, especially the elderly and some young kids. So I would say that the rising trend should be upsetting everyone in Hong Kong. And before we can control this uprising trend and relieve the pressure from our healthcare system, further opening up is not a realistic option at this point.
With that, the city has tightened some anti-epidemic measures. COVID patients who live with young children, the elderly, or those with chronic illnesses must be put into isolation. The same applies to patients who do not have an individual room or toilet. Patients aged 70 or above who have only had one jab or have not been vaccinated at all must also be put into isolation. Starting Sunday, residents entering banquets catering to more than 8 diners must show proof of a negative RAT from within the past 24 hours or nucleic acid test results received within 2 days before entering the venue. Authorities also urged residents to take more RATs, especially before attending cross-family gatherings. The government says the utilization rate of private hospital beds set aside for patients transferred from public hospitals is not ideal.
We
are we're facing increased pressure, for the public healthcare system. Public system is coping with close to 90% of the hospital needs of Hong Kong people.
The 13 private hospitals are going to provide 364 beds, but only 202 beds are in use. 5 hospitals has this utilization rate of over 60%. The highest has got over 90%. There are also 3 hospitals with 0%.
Still, Chairman of the Hong Kong Private Hospitals Association, William Ho, said there are a number of factors contributing to the situation. He noted that public hospitals have cancelled the transfer of some 40% of patients they initially wanted to send over. Among them are patients or family members who do not want to transfer. More senior government officials have been infected with the coronavirus. Deputy Chief Secretary for Administration Warner Chuk and Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Algeria Yao both tested positive for COVID today. Timothy Lee has more.
The list of senior officials infected with the virus is growing larger by the day. Deputy Chief Secretary for Administration Warner Chuk and Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Algeria Yao tested positive on their RAT tests earlier today. Both Chuk and Yao went to work yesterday. They were seen wearing masks at work and performed their daily RAT tests. Neither of them traveled overseas in recent days. Chuk and Yao are currently undergoing a self-isolation period per the instructions of the Center for Health Protection. Undersecretary for Commerce and Economic Development Bernard Chan and Political Assistant to the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Bruce Lee were listed as close contacts and are undergoing quarantine at home. Their RAT test results came out negative today. The affected offices and building floors will be thoroughly disinfected. This month, the city saw several of its high-ranking officials infected with the virus. They include Undersecretary for Labor and Welfare Ho Kai Ming, Director of Fire Services Andy Yeung, Commissioner of the Independent Commission Against Corruption Wu Ying-ming, Commissioner of Police Raymond Su, and Director of Immigration Ao Ka Wang. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
CLP Power has released a report on the fire at its power bridge in Yunlong. The accident led to a power blackout in the Northwest New Territories, affecting hundreds of thousands of people. CLP said a fluorescent light which caught fire was the possible cause. Christy Khan tells us more.
Some 170,000 households in the Northwest New Territories were affected by the blaze that evening in June, spending the entire night without electricity. CLP today disclosed the details of the incident's investigation report, saying it was not caused by factors such as foul play, power glitch, or hot weather.
The most likely causes of the fire is the fluorescent light inside the cable tunnel on the ceiling, which caught on fire first, and then it affected the communication cable underneath it, and the fire spread to the transmission power cable. And after that, then the fire spread across the bridge.
The power company said it believes the fire started near the cable bridge's Kwang Yip Street entrance.
But unfortunately, as I just mentioned, because the fire was so fierce, at that night, most of the equipment inside the cable bridge were already damaged. So that's why it is very, very difficult to determine the status of the fluorescent light before the incident.
The company said it was a very rare accident, adding maintenance and inspection of the power bridge had been conducted last November. Nothing abnormal was observed at that time. CLP also said they had already applied risk mitigation measures to the other 4 cable bridges to address future risks.
So we have applied fire retardant paints on the cables. We have installed heat detection system. We have also installed wet sprinkler system as a means of firefighting.
The company meanwhile said they would offer a $100 appreciation voucher to affected residents as compensation. They believe the voucher will help boost economic activity in the affected districts, including Yunlong, Tin Shui Wai, and Tuen Mun. Christy Khan, TVB News.
Hong Kong's overall crime figures in the first half of the year was 31,453, about 500 cases more than the same period last year. Secretary for Security Chris Tang said there has been a surge in scams, 70% of which were related to online frauds. He said Hong Kongers had lost almost $1 billion to these scams, but there were fewer crimes such as thefts and rape. The number of child abuse cases also recorded a fall. Additionally, more than 200 people have been arrested for breaching the national security law, and 60% of them had been prosecuted so far. The U.S. government said it would suspend 26 China-bound flights from the United States. It is in response to China's decision to suspend U.S. carrier flights over COVID-19 cases. 4 carriers, Xiamen, Air China, China Southern Airlines and China Eastern Airlines will be suspended from September 5th to 28th. This after China cancelled 26 American Airlines, Delta Airlines and United Airlines flights over COVID-19 cases. The Chinese embassy in Washington said the action was extremely irresponsible. China's policy requires a flight to be suspended if the number of passengers on a mainland-bound carrier tested positive for COVID reached 4% of the total. Welcome back to TVB News. Ukraine says electricity from its largest nuclear power plant was cut off from its national power grid after fires broke out in a nearby area because of shelling. Russian officials are now saying power from the plant is flowing normally into Ukraine. Both sides are blaming each other for the shelling as the 6-month-old war between Russia and Ukraine reaches a critical stage. Nazvi Karim reports.
This still photograph of fires and trailing smoke near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is one that Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky hopes will serve as a wake-up call for a watching world. Indeed, Zelensky is telling the world that it narrowly avoided a radiation disaster as power from the plant was cut off from Ukraine's grid for the first time ever. In his address to the nation, Zelensky said Russian shelling sparked fires in the ash pits of a nearby coal power station that disconnected the reactor complex. Backup diesel generators ensured power supply that is vital for cooling and safety systems at Europe's largest nuclear plant, which supplies 20% of Ukraine's power. Russia captured the Zaporizhzhia plant in March, although it continues to be operated by Ukrainian technicians. The Russians are blaming the fires on Ukrainian shelling. The United Nations wants access to the plant, calling for the area to be demilitarized. The UN says International Atomic Energy Agency officials may visit Zaporizhzhia for an inspection by next week. Experts say a failure at the Zaporizhzhia plant could kill hundreds of thousands of people, with environmental damage stretching beyond Europe. Meanwhile, Russia has admitted firing an Iskander missile onto a railway station in the town of Shaplin, 145 kilometers west of Donetsk, which set at least 5 carriages on fire. Russia said it was a military train and claimed to have killed more than 200 Ukrainian troops. Ukraine said 25 people were killed, though it would not clarify if all the victims were civilians. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Algeria on Thursday to kick off a 3-day visit aimed at strengthening economic relations and healing colonial-era wounds. Algeria is the EU's third largest gas supplier, representing 8.2% of the bloc's imports in 2021. The trip comes less than a year after a month-long diplomatic crisis between the two countries sparked tensions 60 years after the North African nation won its independence from France. In a bid to improve ties, Macron made unprecedented steps to acknowledge torture and killings by French troops during Algeria's 1954-62 War of Independence. Macron and Algeria's president are expected to discuss gas supplies as France and the EU aim to offset potential disruption due to Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden had harsh words to describe Trump-allied Republicans on Thursday, speaking in his first political rally in the run-up to the November midterm elections. Tracy Furness has more.
U.S. President Biden kicked off a coast-to-coast tour to overflowing crowds at a Rockville high school yesterday to support Democratic candidates in a bid to prevent Republicans from taking control of Congress in November's midterm elections. He touted the sharp differences between the two major U.S. parties and called on independent and Republicans to help save democracy.
So I want to be crystal clear about what's on the ballot this year. Your right to choose is on the ballot this year. The safety of your kids from gun violence is on the ballot. And it's not hyperbole. The very survival of our planet is on the ballot. Your right to vote is on the ballot. Even the democracy.
He called on Americans to choose whether to move forward or backward, saying that Trump and the extreme MAGA, Make America Great Again Republicans, have chosen a path of anger, violence, hate, and division.
Will we build a future or obsess over the past? Will we be a nation of unity, of hope, of optimism, not a nation of anger, violence, hatred, and division? Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans have made their choice to go backwards.
But not everybody in the crowd agreed with his message. Just months ago, as inflation soared in the US, Biden's poll numbers soured and his agenda stalled. But with the voter reaction to the Supreme Court's overturning Roe versus Wade and a good summer of other core issues of concern to the Democrats, the party is on the offensive as it heads into the November 8th vote. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
And there's new development over the FBI search of Donald Trump's luxury estate in Florida to look for classified documents. A U.S. judge has ordered the Justice Department to make public a partial version of the search warrant affidavit. More from NBC News.
New tonight, Granted in part. A decision from the Florida federal magistrate to unseal by noon tomorrow a redacted copy of the affidavit used to authorize the controversial Mar-a-Lago search, where FBI agents seized 11 sets of classified information from former President Trump's seaside home. Mr. Trump has demanded the whole affidavit be made public. Late today, former Trump senior advisor Jared Kushner agreed.
And so I think what the judge do is release all the information. This way people can know whether there's a serious allegation or this is more manufactured.
Parts of the search warrant affidavit will be blacked out. The judge finding government lawyers made a compelling argument that releasing all of it would identify witnesses and law enforcement and reveal strategy as well as sources and methods. But new information will become public, as the judge described the redactions as narrowly tailored. After President Biden insisted Wednesday he had no warning about the search,
I didn't have any advance notice. None. Zero. Not one single bit.
Mr. Trump mocked that response on his social media and lashed out again at the Justice Department and FBI, claiming their investigation is politically motivated.
The Australian federal government has appointed a former judge to lead an inquiry into former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's secret appointments into several ministries during the peak of the pandemic. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced that former High Court Judge Virginia Bell will head the inquiry into his predecessor Scott Morrison. Morrison secretly appointed himself to 5 ministerial roles between March 2020 and May 2021 at the peak of the pandemic without telling Parliament or his cabinet. The departments in question were Health, Finance, Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, the Treasury and Home Affairs. The Ministers of Home Affairs, the Treasury and Finance were unaware of Morrison's actions until last week. The inquiry into the former Prime Minister is expected to be concluded by November 15th. Recommendations will then be made about changes that could be undertaken to provide greater transparency and accountability in the Australian political system.
We need to have a quick and appropriate inquiry which is not about the politics but about how this happened. Why it happened, who knew about it. We need to have transparency in the process because our system of parliamentary democracy relies upon conventions, relies upon the Westminster system of checks and balances.
Advice earlier this week from the Australian Solicitor General said the secret appointments fundamentally undermined responsible government despite being legally valid. Morrison recently defended himself by saying the pandemic was an extraordinary time and that he secretly took on the ministries because he felt responsibility for the nation was his alone. The former Prime Minister said he only intervened in one ministry following his secret appointments to block an offshore gas project. Daniel Roll, TVB News.
Back in Hong Kong, a survey conducted by Greeners Action, an environmental group, found some banks and restaurants in Hong Kong are providing plastic umbrella bags to patrons on rainy days. 80% of the banks and more than 40% of eateries indicated that they would give out disposable umbrella bags to customers. The group said it's unnecessary to do so, adding some government departments have already stopped providing the bags to the public. The group also called on the government to work on legislation to ban the use of plastic umbrellas bags by 2025. The police have issued the Good Citizen Award to 40 people today, including a woman who prevented a teenage girl from committing suicide. The Good Citizen Award, or GCA, is granted to those who have been recognized for helping the police with fighting and preventing crime. One of the awardees, E.C. Mann, was given the award after she stopped a 16-year-old girl from jumping off a 6-story high bridge in Qingyi's Chenghong estate. Having children of her own, she comforted the girl and successfully led her to safety. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.